Welcome everybody to Drive to Win. I'm Justin Bell. I'm your host here in the beautiful Sirius XM studios at the Wynn Las Vegas. Well, we have a great guest on today, Fred Smith, who is the Motorsport Editor at Road and Track. He'll be joining us just to dive into the weekend. Well, what did you think about that then? Singapore, under the lights, the original street race under the lights, which really paved the way for what we're going to experience here in Las Vegas in just a few short weeks' time. Well, I always look forward to Singapore. I think it's just one of those races where the liveries, the helmets, the intensity of everything seems to ramp up. And really qualifying set up what should have been an amazing race. And I mean, you have George Russell stomping away with his pole position, 7th of his career. Max lining up next to him, Oscar Piastri just behind. I mean, I thought that Ferrari were in with a little bit more of a shot with Hamilton qualifying up in 6th, but you knew that it was going to be a big day for the championship. There was something pivotal about all the setup for this weekend. And I think that obviously if we're feeling that at home, you know they're feeling that out on the grid. Heat, humidity, there was a lot of coverage on social media about what the drivers were doing, preparing themselves for the endurance of the high humidity in Singapore. And believe me, they might have cool suits on, they might be trying everything they can, training in a sauna. We saw Carlos Sainz doing that on a Peloton, but it really doesn't prepare you for an hour and a half or so behind the wheel of a Formula One car so caged in. And I think that is the athletic side that many of us don't get to see. Well, rain overnight as you were coming up to the start of the race really probably changed quite a few things, made certainly the right-hand side of the grid not quite so adhesive off the line as we were about to see, which caused a few things. I mean, super exciting as the lights went green, as the red lights turned off. Green is how we used to do it when we were younger. And a lot was set in motion. Now, obviously, kicking off, we got to say congratulations to McLaren for 2 in a row on the Constructors' World Championship. First time they've done that since the early 90s. And, I mean, if you compare it to other sports, it really is an amazing turnaround. What a comeback from the back of the grid just 3 years ago to winning the title 2 years in a row. It's just extraordinary. I mean, there's a lot of places to give credit for that. Zach Brown, he grabbed it by the papayas, as you could say, and he took the team by changing the infrastructure. They had their new wind tunnel. He brought in some key personnel. My great buddy, sadly passed now, Gilles de Ferran, he came in. He set a lot of things in motion that they're reaping the rewards of now. They developed upgrades that worked and brought in Andrea Stella. And with this new winning mindset, which extends to well over 1,000 people between Woking and around the world and the trackside people, they really took the team back to the top with 2 incredible drivers signed for their raw talent, their desire to win. And it was perhaps the most symbiotic relationship on the grid until now. And it was a new approach to teammate management until now. So let's dive into a bit. It is really the conversation that is dominating social media and everybody. However, if it had gone right, we wouldn't even be talking about it. So let's dive in. We all know what happened. Coming down into turn 3, off the line, a series of events unfolded that really caused a lot of stress. And I mean, if you think about it, with George Russell, he had a better start than Max. Max always has great starts. And what happened next, I think we should look at it from the 3 different perspectives. I mean, from Lando's point of view, he's probably a bit peed off that he didn't qualify better. He should be. They're in ultimately the better car, and they made a little mistake in qualifying, and he's not starting from the front row. That is trigger number 1. He had a great start, and he must have been thinking to himself, everyone says I don't have good starts. That is the old Lando. I'm the new Lando. And he rocketed up and saw an opportunity. He saw a window open. His teammate didn't defend quite as aggressively as he might have done because he was looking at the 2 cars in front. He was a little shocked at the way Max checked up going into T3 and had a slight little touch, which we only really saw on the replay, but it pitched him into his teammate on the outside, Oscar Piastri. In that moment, I'm sure there was one of those, oh my God, I don't want to do that. That's going to cause a lot of troubles. But boom, he didn't go in the wall. Thank goodness. Let's get on with the race, reset, recalibrate, and go. And as we saw, he ended up trailing Max later on in the race, didn't get the chance to go by, whichever way you want to look at it. But that, as far as Lando was concerned, was the end of the story. From Oscar's point of view, he also was peed off. He didn't get a better qualifying lap. Let's face it, these are circumstantial things that all brought intensity to the moment. He had a decent start, but he's focused on Max and George. But he left the door open a little bit, and he probably didn't expect Lando to have such a good start. This orange flash is coming down the inside, and he's thinking to himself, well, he won't take too many risks, but he might, because he is the guy that's got to be the aggressor in our relationship right now. But the next thing is he feels a bump. He almost goes in the wall. You could see his hands crossed up as he's heading. I mean, by a millimeter, he misses it. But he doesn't hit the wall, does he? But he is annoyed. He's annoyed so much that the radio comms are like nothing we've heard from him before. I guess if you can, he's saying, I guess if you hit the other car, the only way to get out of it is by hitting your teammate. Is that okay? Are you going to give me the position back? And it really did take away his rhythm for almost all the rest of the race, which is strange because normally we see him reset his internal stress meter very, very quickly. But which part exactly is he annoyed about? We'll come back to that. And for Max, I think he just looks in the mirror and goes, what are those kids doing? They're at it again. I don't think he gets bothered by all this environmental stuff. He just gets on with it. And he put his head down and stayed in touch with Russell as he could. Never thought about turn 3 again, I doubt. But I'm sure he's thinking, how did they not out-qualify me? They're in the best car. So here's the thing. Everybody in that moment was right and wrong. And this is the Formula One World Championship, Drivers' Championship we're talking about. The number of people that have won that over the years, they're immortalized. So there's a lot to play for. Let's think and remember that drivers sharpen and hone their instincts through thousands of repetitions, thousands of laps on a go-kart track, bringing their way up through the junior formula. They have natural talent, but karting is very instinctive and it's reactive. And as any driver can tell you, and if you have driven on track, I'm hoping you're able to, feel what I'm saying now. And if you haven't, please take it from me. No matter whatever level you're driving at, you put the helmet on and it all goes calm. All that bullshit around you calms down. You're now in the moment to race. And the speeds of Formula One cars are so explosive and it's so minuscule, the time that you have to make a decision in. It's intuitive when it's right. And going into that first series of corners in Singapore, that's what we were dealing with. It was, yes, it's based on good decision making, but it's also absolutely explosively instinctive. And we have the benefit sitting back in this it's almost like we're dissecting the anatomy. We take everything apart, and I've said it before, we overanalyze because we have so much data, the cause and effects of a situation. But really, the start of a race, your senses and your reactions are heightened in the moment. But I do concede that the pressure, the environment, all around this situation are what caused them to react in a certain way that maybe they wouldn't normally. I mean, the Constructors' Championship is now locked in, but it wasn't at the start of that race. And Lando, however, has one objective. We have to remember that. He's just got to go. He's got to show his tougher and silence his critics. And when Lando does something like this, we say he's overreacting and he's being overly aggressive. When Oscar does it, we say, God, he's like Michael Schumacher, he's like Ayrton Senna. We don't say he is overreacting. So there's a little bit of a disparity in how we view those two. Lando also is facing a very difficult window if he doesn't manage it. If he lets Oscar maintain too big a gap, he is forcing McLaren into choosing Oscar for the championship, for the title fight, if Max continues to get closer. So literally, Lando has to make the most of every opportunity to stop that happening. And Lando is a racer. We need to see it. he's showing us it. So I think we should, pack our bags and shut up a bit about that. And I think you saw a little feistiness in his response in the post-race conference. Oscar is pissed, and I would be too about the whole situation. But I think it's an overreaction based on all the other circumstantial stuff. Was he annoyed he got caught out by Lando? Yeah, I think he was. Is there a hangover from Monza where, I think there is, where he was forced to concede to Lando through team instructions. He shouldn't be upset about a last-minute dive into a corner. I mean, in Austria and Hungary, he came up the inside of Lando with all 4 tires blazing, with smoke coming off them. So he's not... you can't not lay the finger of blame on him on things like this. Does he think Lando's favourite? Well, hopefully he doesn't look at Instagram, because all the memes say that certainly that is the case. But also, after the incident, was he trying to send the pit lane a message about the pit wall, a message, Andrea and Zach, that this Papaya Rules stuff is just bull. It's not going to work out. And he's forcing a situation through his, aren't you going to do something about that? Knowing it's never going to come out. So I think it's all that and more. But, for me, in the media pen, we saw the inevitability of reflection, and we see it a lot in Formula One, in all forms of racing. In the heat of the moment, the drivers are at 12,000 revs in the red line. And again, that adrenaline is distilled down. It's so pure. But you don't have the ability to see the whole picture. When you look at the replay and you go, oh, actually, he did get bumped by Max. Max did check up. He knocked it into him. I think we saw him composed a little bit more. And one of the things that I like about Oscar is his ability to refocus. It's his strength, isn't it? And he gets himself back on track. But the pressure each week when your competition's getting closer, maybe we're seeing he is a very young man, and it's still early days in his Formula One career. I think he's going through some new emotions, let's put it like this. So my final thoughts on it. Their teammates right now, one of them absolutely should win this championship. Maybe it is the last chance for a few years for McLaren. We have no clue in the new rules era coming up. But here's something. They're not going to be teammates forever, guys. They're really not. There's rumors of Oscar positioning himself for a move to Ferrari one day when he strikes gold at McLaren. And I think that maybe is something that, everyone's keeping in mind. And I'm not sure the team are ready for unruly fighting kids. I'm sure Andrea, Stella, and Zach and the others are going, all right, how are we going to handle this one? People are saying, let them race. But if you have 2 killers in your team, I'm not sure you're going to be able to stop them. History never remembers the nice guy, does it? Well, I do want to mention, before we bring on our guest, just about George Russell. It was domination from pole position. And even though he seemed surprised at the pace they had, in a way, that's part of it. Sometimes as a driver, if your car is right, you're not overthinking the moment. You're able just to rise to the occasion, and the entire Mercedes-Benz team did, including Kimi. I thought he had a great drive. The car was alive. I mean, he did 2 laps fast enough for pole. I mean, that's wild. The fact he was able to get 2 laps out of the tires and the way the car was set up to lead from the front in such demanding conditions, that is not easy. No wonder he was exhausted afterwards. And sometimes if you don't know what it's like behind the wheel, you could think that sitting out front was easy. What have you got to do? But on a track like that, where momentary lapse in concentration would result in you going in the wall, making a mistake, taking yourself out, it is incredibly arduous. And in those temperatures, I think he did an amazing job. It was a beautiful drive. The wild thing is I didn't really register that he still hasn't signed his Mercedes contract, which is incredible. And I'm sure that every time he does a race like this, it just adds another 0 to the number. And how it isn't even done yet is wild. Again, if you dig in on like at Autosport and places like that, they talk about how, Toto, Max is a dream of Toto's to get him there on the squad. But if I was Russell, I'd be saying, I'm giving you my heart and soul here, and I'm winning races for you. I think you need to pack that one back in its suitcase. And would you really keep Kimi Antonelli instead of George Russell right now? I'm confused. But who am I? Well, we're now just a few short weeks away from the 2025 Concours right here at the Wynn Las Vegas. This year's event is a weekend-long celebration that promises to be the social event of the fall season, where the world's most prestigious cars and top automakers will grace the greens of the Wynn Golf Club for the 2025 Concours at Wynn Las Vegas. It's the fourth annual gathering featuring an expanded showcase of more than 250 unique cars within 4 judged and non-judged categories for vehicle entry and display. This year's event will take place from October 31st through November 2nd, so now's the time to get involved. For more information regarding tickets and room packages, visit lasvegasconcours.com. Well, it was a great race, and I can't dive into it with my guest, Fred Smith. He is the Motorsports Editor at Road and Track. He's an all-round car guy, and he was one of those rarities in America. He was a Formula One fan before the Drive to Survive era. And he came on the show last year. I'm looking forward to hearing his thoughts. So, Fred, nice to have you back on the show, mate. How have you been?
Pretty good. I've been enjoying a surprisingly complicated season of F1, given that it's a bit of a one-car effort. But there's been a lot to take in. A lot of other interesting things happening, especially in the sports car world this year. FIA World Endurance Championship just got shaken up pretty largely by Porsche, unfortunately dropping out for next year. So I've been in kind of a panic dealing with that, but excited about the weekend of racing, excited about this past weekend, excited about Petit Le Mans coming up this weekend on the sports car side.
And that's why you have a Le Mans jacket on. I get it. That's the blouson from the ACO. I do want to say before I jump in, I went on the Road and Track website last night, and you guys you still get it. You offer up the right mix. It's like aspirational content as drug dealers. Right, you've got the best track cars that you can buy in 2025 as your headline, which immediately makes me go and look through them. Not that I have the money or the will to spend it, but you know how to deliver. It must be so fun when everyone puts those things together.
We just got back from our Performance Car of the Year test last week, and it was quite a good time. I had to come away remembering that I cannot afford a Lamborghini Temerario, which is unfortunately a little bit crushing.
That is the problem with what we do. People say, why don't you own this or that? I go, I get to drive cars that I cannot afford and talk about racing that I no longer do. So yeah, basically I'm living in the past. Anyway, so we do have Petit Le Mans this weekend. We'll get to that maybe a bit at the end. But obviously the race setup in Singapore, I don't know about you, I love looking at Singapore. I remember the first time I saw it under the lights, I was so mesmerized. But there was the feeling that this was a very important, pivotal race for all these different machinations of the championship. Would you agree? You're sort of seeing the setup going, whatever we're about to see is going to have an impact.
I remember seeing that Red Bull have something in qualifying in Singapore for what felt like the first time in 15 years and thinking that the season was still open. And certainly after the first lap, it looked for just about half a second there like it was going to be extremely open. It looks like George Russell probably could have done a lot more if Mercedes was where they've been the past month, 3 months ago. But nevertheless, we have a lot to settle in the last few races, especially with a lot of sprints left. I cannot believe how much Max Verstappen's been able to extract from that car here, and particularly at Monza. And I know that those are just not tracks that suit the McLaren, but I didn't really think they suited historically Red Bull either. So I've been pretty shocked by that.
And if you're shocked by it, imagine how the McLaren pit wall and engineers are shocked by it. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, Fred, I was going, you can just imagine the scene in the debriefing room when they go, guys, we have the fastest car. You two are supposed to be two of the fastest drivers. And he's kicking our ass in a car we know isn't as good as ours. You definitely know that whichever way they cut it, they can't get away from the unavoidable fact that they don't have Max Verstappen.
And Mercedes certainly seem to have tried too. So the only thing you can do is wait out that contract and hope he decides he doesn't like F1 anymore. Doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I think my personal feeling is you saw it by him racing at the Nürburgring the other day. He's more likely to be wearing a jacket like you're wearing than going to another Formula One team. I think that's my take on it.
That was certainly my read. I spoke to him during the Las Vegas race weekend last year at a Honda event when he ran the Acura ARX IMSA car. And he certainly seemed excited about running sports cars, probably more so GT3 than prototypes, but I'm sure he'd be open to both. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to fold the two together for a while, but ultimately, when he's accomplished everything he's accomplished, I don't know how many world championships he actually personally wants, if he would be having more fun running something else.
Yeah, I can't see him going for 7 or 8, like, getting 7, going for 8. I mean, if he wins everyone, he'll keep going. But yeah, listen, we can't certainly get in the mind of Max Verstappen any more than we can in the mind of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. But there was a lot going through their tiny young brains as they headed off the start line, wasn't there? Obviously, we could see that one side of the grid wasn't so good off the line, especially after that rain. Max went on softs. Second race in a row, he's gone with a different tire strategy because of grid position, because of trying to get track advantage. Everyone else on mediums. I had a different premonition for how that start was going to go, obviously. I actually thought Max would get George into turn 1, and that would cause a whole different set of strategy decisions behind him. But give me your take. We have to talk about it because, as you know, everything's buzzing about the Lando Oscar fiasco at the first corner, or potential fiasco. How do you read what went on? Now we have all the data.
I thought it was a little bit overblown compared to their clash in Canada. Obviously, there was a little more mutual involvement here than in Canada, but I think it was a little bit more no harm, no foul, given how vocal Oscar's reaction was on the radio afterward. This is the sort of thing that happens when teammates fight for championships. It's the sort of thing that McLaren could have solved 5 months ago if they had chosen a driver, or if they had been more clear about how they were going to handle this in the first place. There's the quote that's been going around from much earlier in the year where Piastri says that the only Papaya rule is don't crash into each other. And certainly this came dangerously close, but I still think Canada is the only time that they've necessarily violated that. This is the sort of thing that I think is solvable in debriefing, and certainly it's solvable on track if the drivers can keep a cool head for more than 2 laps in a row.
I mean, you're right. You're right in the way that if he had got, I said it to Jeremiah, my producer, and Brian in the studio behind it, I was like, if he'd got away with it, we would not be talking about it. We'd be talking about an audacious move and how he's found his balls, right? I mean, we'd be going, Lando's doing what he needs to do. And he has to be the aggressor, Fred. Otherwise, that gap in the championship is going to get too big and they will back a horse. But right now, he's edging it away all the time. I thought it was very intuitive to do what he did. And obviously, he was surprised by Max checking up a bit. But you have to go for it as a driver. You watch so much racing. I always say drivers make 1,000 moves a race that if they get away with 999 of them, we think they're brilliant. And one goes wrong and we overanalyze it. That's definitely the case here.
And another thing with racing drivers in general is that I think everybody thinks of themselves as the guy who takes the risks, the guy who takes the aggressive path, the guy who's really fighting. You don't really talk to any of the guys with a reputation for patience and hear, oh, I'm the patient one. Nobody wants to be the patient one. And certainly Lando Norris does not want to be the patient one. And I think Oscar Piastri, after last week, is probably pretty bored of hearing that he's a nice man type. I think Oscar Piastri is probably thinking, next time I have the opportunity, I'm going to make sure Lando doesn't have that space either.
As they should, right? I mean, if you were, as a racing fan and as someone that understands it, and as someone that used to sit in those seats, you should go for it. I mean, was Ayrton Senna said, right? If you don't go for a gap, you're not a driver. Which side of the camp do you normally sit on when it comes to Lando and Oscar?
Generally with Piastri, especially after Canada, I think that Canada mistake kind of felt like the culmination of all of this narrative of Norris as a choker from before 2024, before he had that breakthrough win where we kind of thought of him as somebody who couldn't really get it done, who was not really outperforming Sainz as a young driver, and obviously really did very well against Ricciardo, but didn't have that opportunity to win a race when Ricciardo did win one. I think that really went away for about a year there. But in the middle of that stretch where he was winning races and he was fighting for the Constructors' Championship last year, there was still this kind of earworm in the back of his head of Max Verstappen. And it seemed to be eating away at him, even though it wasn't a real championship fight at any point during this. And this year, I really thought head-to-head with Piastri, that was going to get to him. And at Canada, it really did. But since then, obviously, he has been on an absolute tear. He has cut as much as he can into this thing. The big concern is the freight train pulling up behind the two of them. But I've been pretty impressed by how Norris has handled effectively the entire last 3 months. That being said, I still think Piastri is probably the guy I'm going to back for the championship with the lead and with the performances he had earlier this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think he can dig deep. I think Mark Webber can guide him. But it was the way he reacted after the incident that shows the pressures. And I started off the show dissecting a little bit and saying, in the instant, a driver will make this beautiful, instinctive, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, reactive decision. But there is a lot of cumulative circumstantial burden, if you like, that makes you decide, react one way or the other. Why do you think he was so vocal on the radio afterwards? Are you okay with him barging him out of the way? I guess that's the way we're going to do it now. What do you think that was all about?
It reminds me of Nico Rosberg, who never seemed more miserable than the year he won a championship. He seemed perfectly content to be the guy who sometimes win races until he was actually in that fight. And when he was in that fight, you could see that something changed in him. And I'm not sure he liked it, given that he stepped away after he actually got it done. It seems like Piastri is getting to that point where he realizes that he can't give anymore. He can only take. And he needs to probably have been taking a lot earlier this year. Because if he had been taking a lot earlier this year, and certainly if he had been taking a lot early this year, and he didn't go off at Canada, this championship's probably already in hand for him.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. I think this weird dynamic of these papaya rules, I think it's like trying to make both your kids equal. And this is a sport where only one of them will win. And I said at the Open, which I'm sure you agree with, history doesn't ever talk about the nice guys. It talks about the winner. We don't talk about all the things that go around it, do we? We just say on the results, who was the 2025 world champion? And I think that, we talk about Max coming up, as you said, this specter, this looming thing coming up from behind, which happens to be Max Verstappen, the one guy that can pull it off. As we look at him doing that, can you imagine from Max's point of view, in an instant, he looks in his mirrors and he realizes the championship could have swung his way in a massive turnaround, couldn't it? In that instant, he could have been clearly on his way to the championship chase.
And there are plenty of chances for it to happen again in the coming races. You think about what turn one at Coda is going to look like. Yeah. Very real chance that Max pulls away from that, and all of a sudden he's in second behind Russell, or he's leading, or he's behind Leclerc and will soon pass him on account of how the SF25 has unfortunately been this year. And he's just clear. He's one good race away from taking the lead after that. All he really needs to do is get that win in a race where there's McLaren double DNF. And historically, when teammates fight for championships, there will be double DNFs.
Yeah.
McLaren's pretty lucky that there hasn't been so far.
Yeah. And you've got that guy who's just, I like to always say, Max is immune from all this bullshit, isn't he? He just gets his head focused down, and him in the stalking mode, him in the hunting mode is something that you just don't want behind you. And I think they know he's like omnipresent, and he's right there. I thought one of the things about watching the restart, I don't know how you feel, Fred, but sometimes there's so much going on at the start, especially with what we just saw with the McLarens. You kind of overlook some of the great moves that are happening behind, and when they do the restart, you get into it. Hadjar was wonderful, right? Alonso had a bit of a better start, but then he had a great move and retook him. I don't normally jump back on some of those guys already in the show, but I really like Isaac. Do you keep your eye on him as someone for the future that's got a place at the top?
I'm actually a little worried about him because the next job that he gets is the dangerous second Red Bull. And especially next year with the new powertrain. The good news for him is the expectations are now so low that with a platform reset, potentially this is a Red Bull that's easier for the second driver to get into. And with a worse powertrain, the expectations are even lower. And he's maybe in a situation that Danny Ricciardo was in his first year against Sebastian Vettel, where he's almost set up to win because he was so clearly set up to fail.
Yeah.
But other than that 1 year worry, I'm pretty confident and comfortable with what Isaac Hadjar has. Considering what happened to him in the last Formula 2 race of last year and the first F1 race of this year, a lot of guys would not recover mentally from that for years. That's the sort of thing that can derail a career. He pretty much walked away and within 3 races was back to comfortably being second best driver in the whole Red Bull system.
Yeah. And I think we saw on social media this time, this week him talking about the F1 paddock. He's not really a fan of it. He thinks it's just money and assholes, basically. And yet he's just going to stay there and do his job and not worried about making friends. A lot of people come in the sport and say that in the beginning, don't they? Actually, Piastri was a bit like that. And Liam Lawson is like that. If you deliver results, you can have that attitude. Raikkonen was like that. If you're a winner, you can do that. But I think it just shows the demands of being a Formula One driver are as intense as we imagine they are.
And I think it's a very interpersonally difficult position to be in. In so many other forms of racing, you have an ally and your teammate. You have somebody you can work with. You talk to, in IndyCar, Alex Palou and Scott Dixon. They're able to not only work very well together, but they have great things to say about each other. They're always happy to share notes, because even when they're the main threat to each other in a given weekend, the reality is that there's 14 other drivers who are probably going to be about the same pace over one lap. In Formula One, you will often be in a situation where not only is your teammate your greatest rival in the championship, your benchmark, your guy that decides your next ride, but he's the guy you're literally going to have to race on track while considering your employment is in peril if you do anything too crazy around him. I think that gets to people. And I think Red Bull in particular has designed a system where this gets to people much more often than it does elsewhere. I always think about the season where Alguersuari and Buemi were told that only one of them would get the Red Bull ride and the other one would be out of Formula One. And I'm not sure if you remember what happened to either of them, but neither of them were in Formula One the year after.
That's true. You have a good memory. Wow, amazing. Well, around lap 17, McLaren did a dummy call. It was so blatant, wasn't it? It's like, who calls box like after the first four corners on a racetrack? No one does. So we all knew it was a charade. But then Max went into the pits and McLaren lost the advantage of the undercut. I love the way Max was told, make the most of the outlap on the hard tires. He pushes, so he is the guy to do that. And Lando obviously had to respond out there on track. I think one of the things I'm really getting to grips with this season, Fred, is the impact and reality of the strategies that they're having the contingency strategies they have to come up with. And I find it amazing that despite all that preparation, they can still sort of be caught off guard or make the wrong decision. But in the end, it's very reactive. And Max, they called it, he came in ahead of Lando. The strategy side of things in Formula One, it is so intense. It's the second race, isn't it?
And the in-laps and the out-laps become the single most important parts of the entire day. And it's the timing of when you get on them, and it's the timing of how you handle the tires, even coming off tire warmers, getting fully up to temperature. And to me, that's the most fun part of the race to watch, is to watch a guy who is coming in the next lap, who has been undercut, who is absolutely panicking on that lap to get every single bit of pace he can out of the car on the way in. And I don't particularly love strategy determined by tire compared to strategy determined by fuel. I wish there was also refueling, but I certainly can't argue with the amount of in-race drama that it's created over the past 10 or so years under Pirelli.
Yeah. I mean, it really has, but it's also factored in the driver to a greater extent. And I know we're hearing that that's perhaps a lot of the reason under Mecky's why the Red Bull team is finding traction again, so to speak, is because they're involving Max in a lot more of that decision-making process. They're going away just from AI algorithms and what the computers say, because I promise you, behind the wheel, the driver is feeling some stuff that they don't know, and the team also knows stuff that the driver possibly couldn't know. So, I mean, when you see them ask Max, can he run longer, or asking Oscar to have the option. Oh, that's the thing. Why would they give Lando that choice on the radio to come in before or after? I think I know the answer, but why would they go to him and defer to him on that?
Some days it just feels like because Lando's the chosen son and Oscar isn't. But I imagine it was in race more specifically because they thought that Lando was in a position where he could be more versatile with the strategies, whereas Oscar was more worried about the Red Bull in front while the car behind was, or rather the McLaren in front being under control, so you don't have to worry about the Red Bull in front while the car behind is not under control.
Okay, that makes sense. I also just think it's maybe part of that Papaya Rules crap that whoever's in front gets that that chance to make that decision. But I also saw something that makes me not want to be the second McLaren pitting. Lando's been the second car pitting the last couple of races and has had those, I don't know if he was the second car actually, but he had dismal pit stops, 2 in a row. Comes to this one, and I'm sure everybody is on his side of the garage going, this has to be a good stop. He cannot have a 3 in a row bad stops. But he was a great one, 2.1 seconds. But then Oscar comes in, and he has the crappy pit stop at 5.1 seconds. Same guys, same equipment. It just shows the intensity of the moment. And I'm like holding my breath knowing that lost 3 seconds on track is so hard to get back. I know you go to these races, you know, especially like here in Vegas. Have you had the chance to be in the garage watching one of those pit stops up close? Because I haven't, but I imagine it's unbelievable. It's synchronicity in motion.
Not ground level, unfortunately, for F1, but I have been at the Canadian Grand Prix last year. I was lucky enough to be sitting right above the pit wall. And the looks on the faces of Formula One engineers and mechanics when a car is coming in is one of extreme stress. It does not seem like a particularly fun place to be in, because you get that 2.1 second, everyone's happy. Nobody thinks you won them the race by doing your job. You get that 5-second stop, and the entire world suddenly recognizes you. And if you're a Ferrari mechanic, sometimes people online will learn your name, and they will post about you, and they will post about how you dropped a lug nut.
Oh, God. That is the difference. You're not anonymous anymore. But I'll tell you, again, as a former driver, there was something that makes a driver very honest, or you try to be. When you clip the wall, there's no one else to blame, right? I mean, generally you come in going, oh, crap, that was me. When the team has a slow pit stop, it's very much a case of everybody doing this. So, but with their time and motion studies and things, I know that they're all very much under the gun, literally. Let's quickly talk about young Kimi Antonelli. I mean, around the middle of the race, he's hounding Charles Leclerc. He's so young. You have to keep remembering that. He's the same age as my daughter. His cocoon of maturity, I think, is evolving nicely. That's my observation. I know Toto gave him some harsh words like a parent a couple of weekends ago, but the support is nevertheless there. How would you evaluate him and say he's doing exactly what he should be doing?
I was very worried about him in the middle of the year, and in the preseason when there were all the discussions of his crashes and testing, I was very worried he would not be this far along, especially maturity-wise, especially considering in Formula 2, he wasn't really fighting week to week for a championship or anything, like Hadjar was, like Bortoleto was. I really thought he would be further behind than he is. But the problem is I think Toto Wolff thought he'd be further ahead than he is. And there was a lot of expectation readjusting over the summer when he was struggling. Now it looks like he's getting his head a little bit more back on his shoulders. He looks a little bit more comfortable out there. It's a little unfortunate for him that Russell's having such an exceptional season. I don't think it says much about Antonelli. It's hard to say anything about a kid that young who's in his effectively 3rd, 4th season in cars at all, 2nd season in a downforce car of any real speed. But when you look at the standings and you see that George Russell is almost 3 times his points, and George Russell probably would have been contending for a championship if Mercedes were a step ahead at the beginning of the year. And you look at him and you see a kid who, for some reason, people were comparing to Lewis Hamilton coming up when Hamilton was in an unprecedented great position and performed at an unprecedented great level against Alonso. No other great rookie has done that since. Max has not done that since. Vettel has not done that since. It's just Leclerc, for that matter, took 2 years to really get up to the point where he was contending for poles consistently. Russell, obviously in the Williams, was overperforming what a Williams could do. But I think if he were in the Mercedes, he probably would have looked about like Kimi does right now. And I think this is all down to the position that Toto Wolff put him in, a little bit privately, just by putting him in the seat in the first place, but more publicly. The way he talked about him last year at Monza, after he famously crashed because he had, was too far ahead of every other driver in mid-corner speeds in a way that suggested he had some sort of supernatural talent behind the wheel. And it's just setting this kid who's clearly going to be good up for failure by suggesting that he'll immediately be great. He looks like a kid who's clearly going to be good. He looks like probably what I would have expected the best karter in the world 3 years ago would look like in an F1 car now.
Mm-hmm. That's a nice evaluation. Thank you. No, I do think they're managing him well. And as you say, with George having this weekend of incredible performance, it does. But he is right there. Think about it. The other pairing, forget McLaren, the other pairing, Max is teammate, is nowhere in the picture. He gets in the top 10 and he's better than some of the others have been. But, he's not in sixth when his Max is leading, or fifth. So I think Antonelli's doing a great job. Well, listen, we're heading into the final third of the race, and suddenly Max is starting to stalk down George. And the gap was under 3 seconds, and the pressure's definitely building on him. And I thought to myself, from George's point of view, 1 minute you are out front, leading very comfortably, controlling the race. And then you've got the intensity, I talked about it, of how difficult it is to lead in any conditions, but so difficult. Max is making himself get closer. I'm sure McLaren are thinking this is our worst case scenario. Max is about to score yet another win while our two guys are a little further back. He makes some mistakes, falls back to Lando, and now Lando must feel that he has the opportunity to get more points over on his teammate. I wasn't so perturbed about Max not overtaking George. I wanted George to win at this point. But I did feel that Lando needed to do what he doesn't do well, and that is get by Max. What were your thoughts in that moment? Did you think he could get by if he got close enough? Or do you think Max just has his number?
On some level, Max definitely just has his number. And I think it goes back further than when either of these guys were ever in front of a camera, for that matter. And certainly the way that they've been talked about their entire lives, I think Lando's always been maybe different domestically as an English driver driving for an England team. Maybe in his circle, he's hearing other things. But certainly what we hear publicly in global discussions of F1 is always, Lando's really good, but he's not good enough because Max Verstappen exists. And when you're talking about that culmination of all those conversations about him and Piastri on the first lap, I think every time he's behind Max Verstappen, he has that same thought. What's interesting to me is that he doesn't really make mistakes. He just doesn't take risks in those situations. Last year, he took a lot of risks in those situations, and we saw the results were kind of ugly for both him and Max. This year, he doesn't seem like somebody who's really willing to, and in this case, he would have lost 15 points if he had done so in the championship, but really willing to damage both of their cars to make sure that he gets in Max's head and Max knows this is somebody who's really going to fight hard to get past me here. And given the championship situation as it is right now, it was also important not just to put points on Piastri, but to stop the bleeding from Max, because that's a pretty major point swing when you're directly passing him for a podium position. That's going to potentially slow down that momentum. And that's slow building. If he finishes in front of us second or first for the next 5 races, then where are we in Abu Dhabi? And he could stop that right then and there if he had really done something about it. But he was not really in a position to do something about it with Oscar behind him. And I think he wasn't really in a position mentally to do something about it when it's Max Verstappen.
I think you're right. That's my take on it, and I think Max just would have swatted him away, because, Lando would have been a slightly late lunge. It would have been not intentionally half-hearted, but I think it would have been swatted away like an annoying fly, and Lando would have come off worse. But he did do something right during that period, and that is, we always hear about dirty air, but I was very impressed about, it was lap after lap. He was up his chuff. He was driving right behind Max. The back markers, as you know, Fred, you're coming up to back markers and you're looking at it, you're going, this is where it's awful to be the first car there. It's great to be the following car. But actually, Lando was very good in the traffic. The blue flags were working really well, and he didn't lose momentum too much. But he did the only thing he could do, which is a bit, unfortunately, like trying to win the lottery, waiting for Max to make a mistake. But that was really the only game he had, I thought, at that moment.
Yeah, and being able to keep contact to such a degree opens up the door for him to make a mistake in a way that was never going to happen if he was 5 car lengths, 10 car lengths ahead. That's simply not how Verstappen's ever operated when somebody's hunting him down but not really on him. Mm. Most of the mistakes we've seen him make in his career were with Lewis Hamilton on his rear wing. And unfortunately for Lando, he's not Lewis Hamilton. I don't think he has quite the level of intimidation. But certainly he put Max in a much worse position than he would have been otherwise if he wasn't fighting all out for as long as he was.
Yeah, it was good. It was, from that point of view, a great race. But of course, they're slowing each other up. Oscar starts to come back in the picture. I'm thinking Lando's probably going, no. I mean, that puts that pressure on you. You're going, I know I can't get by Max, but oh my God, my teammate, who is arguably pretty annoyed at me, is now catching up. And I'm sure have to wait till Drive to Survive to hear what they were saying on the radios. But I'm sure Oscar's box is saying redemption comes in the form of you going past Lando if you can catch him. And if he could show enough pace to go past Lando and get to Max, it would have been a very interesting story that we didn't see unfold. And I actually was interesting. They were talking on the broadcast that Max could have started to play with the mid-corner speed in the slower corners to bring those two closer together to start a fight. And I thought, he's the kind of guy that would do that. But he didn't. And the race unfolded to the end. And it was George Russell that took the win of his 5th victory in 154 races, which isn't the best batting average, but is one that I'd like. George winning, obviously amazing for Mercedes. You touched on it earlier. It is reflective of a season that could have been different for them. How much do you think this is setting up 2026 from Mercedes' point of view?
Well, the big question for me in 26 is powertrains, because if Mercedes, as rumors seem to suggest, really is that far ahead of Ferrari, and Ferrari is a degree further ahead of everybody else, then it's looking pretty likely that, depending on what they give McLaren, depending on what they give Williams, of course, they can't officially give them more stuff. But when you're developing a new engine, I'm sure there's some preferential treatment and some more tested quality that's going to go into the factory cars. You're in a pretty good position. You do know that you're going to have those McLarens with you in that position, even if Red Bull's nowhere and Ferrari's nowhere, which isn't great, but you're in a pretty good position. And now you're talking about a situation where potentially if Antonelli stays at the senior team and doesn't get booted to Williams for signs or whatever else is being discussed, you're in a situation where you can depend on one driver. You've seen that you can trust him wheel to wheel. You've seen that you can trust him in a extremely muddled field. You've seen him multiple times win in a car that was a 4th place in the Constructors' Championship, 3rd place in the Constructors' Championship type car. You're probably pretty confident that you can take Russell where he needs to go next year.
So why haven't you signed a contract?
I think Toto Wolff has a lot of questions to answer about how he's handled the driver lineup over the past 3 years. I think how he's handled Antonelli and Hamilton has been a problem. How he's handled Russell's been the worst of all. And the real lesson here is that you probably shouldn't trust the management of your career to the person who decides your employment.
Ooh, that's a quote. Yeah, I mean, I think also Toto's obsession with maybe getting Max in the car one day. I mean, if you're George, you're going, I cannot do more, right? I mean, when you walk in as a driver and you win, it's a no excuse environment. It's a no excuse scenario. Unapologetic. You walk in there, I'm winning for you, mate. I'm the one that's winning for you. And making you look good to the Mercedes board. And you don't want George to go fishing elsewhere. I think he needs to stick with Mercedes. And would you really switch out George instead of Kimi? I don't see that.
Ultimately, Kimi, I think, is in a great position to be a good driver. But I think once upon a time, George Russell was the chosen son at Mercedes. And he had a similar start to his career in a lesser car. By the time he got to Mercedes, he was already a little more established. I think he's pretty much the guy he was supposed to be. And I think, frankly, he's probably about where Antonelli's going to be once he gets there. So why are you pushing out potential for potential when you already have a guy who can, he's not Max Verstappen, sure. And if you can get Max Verstappen, it's a different story, especially if Max says, I only want to work with maybe a defined number 2 driver. But assuming that you can have both, have the guy who's winning for you now and the guy who's winning everything is pretty clearly the way to go. Especially if you can put Antonelli in a Williams for 3 years and say, hey, Max, if you want to retire and we'll build a sports car for you or something, then we can move Antonelli back up. And you don't have to lose George. And you don't have to see what George Russell can do in a Ferrari or a Cadillac.
Yeah. Can you give context to what it means to win the Constructors' Championship 2 years in a row for McLaren? I know it means a lot of bonuses. We saw that in the British media for Zach, didn't we? I mean, tens of millions of dollars. But outside the money, how do you rate that success, that achievement?
Last year, to me, was a pretty exceptional feat, considering the reinvention McLaren went under over the years since Hamilton left, since Vodafone left, since they went back to orange and then to the really defined shade of papaya, and then to McLaren as a brand rather than McLaren as the factory team of Mercedes. All of that reinvention was, I think, a lot uglier as it happened than it looks in the rearview mirror, as was the process of switching to younger drivers. We all know the contract situation with Piastri. We all know that kind of uncomfortable situation he's on with Lando Norris right now. But if you zoom out from it and you just look at what they actually did last year, they beat Ferrari head to head to win a Constructors' Championship in a year where neither team could even touch the Drivers' Championship. As a constructor, as a manufacturer, as a group gathering sponsors, and Zach Brown seems to be pretty exceptional at that, inarguably, they accomplished something that they couldn't put to a driver, that they couldn't put to an engine manufacturer, that is entirely the team's work. And that's a lot to be proud of. This year is a pretty clear step above that. This year looks a little bit more like early 2000s Red Bull even than Mercedes or the later Verstappen Red Bull, where it's not necessarily that the car is so comically dominant that they're walking away unless they make a mistake. But it's pretty clear every weekend that you're looking at FP1, FP2 times, and you're seeing where that McLaren is. And as that car goes, so goes the weekend. McLaren hasn't been in that position in a very, very, very long time, almost 20 years. And if you're Zach Brown, if you're Andrea Stella, I think that's proof of just about the most successful rebuild that there's been in a very long time. You look at how long it's taken Williams to get back up to where McLaren was 6 years ago, and you see that for how far they've fallen, they've come just as high back again.
Yeah. Wow. Great assessment. I'm going to have to let you go in a second. I've got like another 20 things I wanted to talk to you about. But let's do Austin in a couple of weeks. Very excited. What is your prediction? What does your top final three look like at the end of that race?
First, my dream for the Circuit of the Americas is they get some trees, because it's a really lovely place in October. And it's an awesome place to go to a GP. Yeah. It's a little hot for anything in the summer. But thankfully it's October. Thankfully it's cool. Track's bumpy by Formula One standards, but thankfully it's not as bad as it was a few years ago. I think it's probably looking pretty good for the McLarens there. And I wouldn't be surprised to see potentially George Russell ahead of Max Verstappen again for third.
Wow. Very interesting. Fred, thanks so much for joining me. Enjoy Petit Le Mans. I know it's going to be a long day for you guys and the drivers. I'll be watching. I know that it's one of my favorite races. That was actually my last professional race there. I finished third in a Ferrari. Anyway, take care, buddy. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Wynn Las Vegas's Ultimate Race Week is back for 2025 and anchored by the Formula One Heineken Silver Las Vegas Grand Prix, November 20th through November 23rd. From immersive pop-ups and branded takeovers to A-list performances and thrilling views of the circuit. Right here at the Wynn Las Vegas, it puts you in the center of it all. For more information regarding room and ticket packages, visit winlasvegas.com. That's winlasvegas.com. Always good to talk to a student of the sport. Fred Smith there from Road and Track. Well, I genuinely am very excited for Austin. It's our second US race of the year. The crowds will be huge. Like I enjoy saying to people, a father and son the other day said, should I go to Miami or go to Vegas? It's just me and my kids. I said, Austin is a great track to go to. It's like old school, even though it's new school. Old school, you can sit on a grass bank, have a burger, hot dog, and watch Formula One cars. It's a great place to be. I will actually be there. I'm involved in a little kickoff event on the Wednesday, a Formula One kickoff event, and then Tag Heuer have something going on the Thursday with Max Verstappen. I'm going to introduce him. I will also be. It'll be like it'll be like speed dating. I'm going to try and get him on the show, so I'm going to have to pitch myself in about 30 seconds. Probably to no avail, but it's worth a shot. I love Austin. I've driven there a lot. Actually, the last time I was there was in that incredible Solus GT, that McLaren bespoke hypercar. 25 of them made. They're like $4 million each. I was doing 208 miles an hour down the back straight. Canopy, and made me feel like a driver again. Anyway, I love the track. Fast, sweeping. It is very bumpy. I can tell you that from first-hand experience. And down the back straight, they are at terminal velocity. Their eyes are shaking in the helmet. Just look out for that in-helmet cam. It will be amazing. But it is designed. It's one of those tracks designed for optimal Formula One car performance. And boy, we're going to see it. I mean, last year, this will just be a distant memory for Ferrari fans. It was Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, and then Max. That will not be happening this weekend, unfortunately. But memories of good times. I think it's very important to get a statement win for either Oscar Piastri or Lando Norris. They have, one of them has to win and get ahead and qualify well. So I think qualifying will be dramatic. But as Fred said, going up into turn one, up that 9-story climb into the turn one where you can outbrake each other into the next world, I think we're going to see some fireworks fly. with the spectre of Max looming large. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't think we're going to see Max win here. I'm going to go with Fred and say one of the McLarens will. But I don't know. George Russell, he's on a move now. So let's see if he can put the cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak. Just bring the popcorn. That's all I say. Thank you very much to Fred Smith for joining us, to the Wynn Las Vegas for having us here in this beautiful SiriusXM studios, and to you for watching. I'll catch up soon. Bye.